Bucola sat in the soft glow of the oil lamp, her eyes fixed on the tiny face of her newborn daughter. The baby cried loudly, her small fist punching the air. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. "This is not my baby," Bucola whispered, her voice trembling. Her husband Deji rushed to her side, his forehead creased with worry. "What are you talking about, my wife?" Tears gathered in Bucola's eyes as she looked up at him. "Look at her face, Deji. Really look. This is not the same child I held this morning." Deji peered down at the screaming infant. To him, she looked like any newborn, small, red-faced, and unhappy. He placed a gentle hand on Bucola's shoulder. "You are tired, my love. 7 years we waited for this blessing, and now you need rest." But Bucola knew what she saw. The rounded cheeks, the shape of the nose, even the way the baby's eyes slanted, everything had changed. A chill ran through her body as she remembered the strange woman from the naming ceremony earlier that day. The village had gathered to celebrate the birth of Falasho under God's protection. After Bucola's long years of waiting, the air had been filled with songs and laughter as each villager brought gifts to bless the child's future. And then came the woman no one recognized. Her clothes were simple but oddly colored, and she walked with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. In her hands, she carried two stones, one dark as rich soil, the other bright as the full moon. "Congratulations on your twins," the woman had said with a smile that revealed surprisingly white teeth. Bucola had laughed nervously. "Thank you for your blessing, but I have only one child." The woman's eyes had seemed to look through Bucola rather than at her. One body, two spirits. Born under the eclipse, touched by both earth and moon. She placed the stones in Bucola's lap. "They will need these." Before Bucola could ask any questions, Deji had shooed the woman away, calling her confused and possibly mad. Now, in the quiet night, with her husband's disbelief hanging in the air between them, Bucola could not shake the feeling that the strange woman had seen a truth no one else could. The baby continued to cry, a different pitch from the gentle coos Falasho had made that morning. Bucola held her close anyway, rocking gently back and forth. "That's all right," she whispered to the child who both was and wasn't hers. "I am here. No matter who you are, I am here." Outside, clouds parted to reveal the moon, nearly full again after the recent eclipse. Its light streamed through the small window of their hut, falling directly on the child's face, illuminating features that did not belong to the baby Bucola had brought into the world. Deji watched his wife cradle the crying infant, concern and confusion battling within him. Something was happening that he could not understand, something that filled the room with a tension he could almost touch. "Try to sleep," he said finally, unable to find any other words. "Things will look clearer in the morning." But Bucola knew that morning would bring its own mysteries. As she sank softly to the stranger in her arms, she wondered what other secrets the eclipse had woven into her daughter's fate. Morning came with golden light streaming through the small window of Bucola's hut. She awoke with a start, her arms still wrapped protectively around her child. The first thing she did was look at her daughter's face. Relief washed over her. The baby looked just as she had when she was born, round cheeks, a tiny button nose, and eyes that reminded Bucola of her own mother. This was Falasho, her daughter, the child she had waited 7 years to hold. "Do you see?" Deji said from the doorway, watching them. "You were just tired. The baby is fine." Bucola nodded, but doubt lingered in her heart. She had not imagined the change. She knew what she had seen. For 3 nights, the same thing happened. As darkness fell, Falasho's features would shift and change, becoming someone else, someone wilder, with eyes that seemed older than they should be. And each morning, the familiar face of her daughter would return. On the fourth day, while Deji was working in the fields, Bucola wrapped Falasho in a cloth, tied her securely to her back, and set out toward the edge of the village where the old spiritualist lived. Mama Ijapa was as ancient as the baobab trees that surrounded her small compound. Her eyes were cloudy with age, but people said she saw more clearly than anyone in the village. She rarely received visitors now, preferring the company of her herbs and spirits, but she made an exception when Bucola arrived with the baby. "I have been expecting you," Mama Ijapa said, her voice like dry leaves rustling. She held out gnarled hands. Let me see the child born under the eclipse. Bucola carefully untied her wrapper and placed Falasho in the old woman's arms. The baby was quiet, watching the spiritualist with curious eyes. Tell me what troubles you, Mama Ijapa said, though her tone suggested she already knew. My daughter's face changes when night falls, Bucola said, her voice barely above a whisper. She becomes someone else. Someone I do not know. Mama Ijapa nodded slowly, her fingers tracing gentle patterns on Falasho's forehead. And there was a woman at the naming ceremony. A stranger with 2 stones. Bucola's eyes widened. Yes. How did you know? The old woman smiled faintly. The spirits talk to those who listen. She looked down at the baby in her arms. Your daughter is special, Bucola. She carries 2 spirits within one body. 2 spirits, Bucola repeated, her hand going to her throat. Twins, Mama Ijapa confirmed. One child of the earth, present in daylight. One child of the moon, who emerges in darkness. They share this body because they could not be separated at birth. Bucola thought of the strange woman's words. Body, 2 spirits. Born under the eclipse, touched by both earth and moon. How is this possible? She asked, though part of her already understood. The eclipse, Mama Ijapa explained. When your daughter was born, the moon and earth were aligned, one shadowing the other. In that rare moment, 2 spirits entered where there should have been one. The old woman's cloudy eyes seemed to clear as she looked at Bucola. This is not a cursed child. It is a blessing of great power. Bucola reached for the small pouch tied at her waist. From it, she withdrew the 2 stones the strange woman had given her. She said they would need these, Bucola said, opening her palm to show the spiritualist. Mama Ijapa nodded, her expression solemn. Earth and moon, darkness and light. These stones are anchors for each spirit. Keep them close to the child always. What should I do? Bucola asked, her voice breaking. My husband doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm imagining things. The old woman carefully handed Falasho back to her mother. Embrace both your daughters, Bucola, the quiet one of day and the fierce one of night. They need your love equally. She touched Bucola's hand gently. And prepare yourself. Those who carry dual spirits walk difficult paths, but they also bring great gifts. As Bucola left the spiritualist compound, she held Falasho close, feeling the weight of the stones in her pouch. 2 daughters, not one. The thought filled her with both wonder and fear. Falasho in the day, she whispered to her sleeping child. And who are you at night, my little moon child? Who will you become? The baby stirred slightly, but did not wake. Above them, the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, and Bucola quickened her steps toward home, knowing that night and her other daughter would soon arrive. Bucola sat in front of their hut, rocking gently as she waited for Deji to return from the fields. The 2 stones, one dark, one light, lay in her lap beside the sleeping Falasho. She had practiced the words she would say to him all afternoon, but now that the moment approached, her mouth felt dry. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the village in gold and amber. Soon it would set, and with darkness would come the change. This time, she needed Deji to see it for himself. When he finally appeared on the path, his hoe resting on his shoulder, Bucola's heart quickened. He looked tired, but smiled when he saw them. My 2 treasures, he said, setting down his tools and reaching for the water gourd. Deji, Bucola began carefully. Tonight I need you to watch our daughter with me. All night. His smile faded. Bucola, we've talked about this. The baby is fine. Please, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. I went to see Mama Ijapa today. Deji stiffened. Many in the village respected the old spiritualist, but he had always been wary of her. The old woman who speaks to spirits. Why would you take our child there? Because I needed answers, Bucola replied, and she gave them to me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Bucola told him everything. The visit to the spiritualist, the explanation of the 2 spirits, the importance of the stones. Deji listened silently, his expression darkening with each word. This is nonsense, he said finally. Superstition. Our daughter is not possessed by spirits. Not possessed, Bucola corrected gently. she asked her, two spirits. Two daughters in one body. Please, just watch with me tonight. Reluctantly, Deji agreed. They brought Falasho inside and placed her on their sleeping mat. The oil lamp cast soft shadows across the walls of their small home. They sat on either side of their child, waiting. The change began subtly. First, the baby's breathing pattern shifted. Then her small fingers, which had been loosely curled, stretched wide. Bucola placed the moon-bright stone near the baby's hand. Almost immediately, the tiny fingers reached for it, grasping it with surprising strength. Deji leaned closer, his disbelief giving way to confusion. Before his eyes, his daughter's features began to shift, the curve of her nose straightening, her lips growing fuller, her cheeks becoming less round. "What is happening?" he whispered, his voice strangled. "She's coming," Bucola said softly. The night daughter. By midnight, the transformation was complete. The baby who lay before them was clearly not the same child who had been there at sunset. This baby's eyes, when they opened, seemed to glow in the lamplight. "This is Funcho," Bucola said, naming her second daughter for the first time. "Child of the moon." Deji backed away, rising to his feet. "This is not natural," he said, his voice shaking. "This is evil." "No," Bucola protested, reaching for him. "Mama Ijapa said it's a blessing." "A blessing?" Deji cut her off. "Our child changes into someone else at night, and you call this a blessing?" He paced the small hut, running his hands over his head. "The other villagers cannot know about this. They would drive us out, or worse. Then we keep it secret," Bucola pleaded. "We protect her." Both of her. For 3 more nights, they watched the transformation together. Each night, Deji grew more distant, more afraid. He stopped holding the baby altogether and began sleeping outside the hut, claiming the night air helped him breathe better. Bucola knew the truth. He couldn't bear to be near his changing daughter. On the 4th morning, as Falasho returned with the dawn, Deji stood in the doorway with a small bundle of his belongings. "I cannot do this, Bucola," he said, his voice hollow. "I have tried, but this is beyond what a man should bear." Bucola felt her heart breaking in her chest. "She is your daughter." "There's something I do not understand," he replied. "Something I fear." "Where will you go?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "To my cousin's village across the river. I have already spoken with him." "You're leaving us?" The pain in her voice was unbearable, even to her own ears. Deji looked at her, and for a moment, she saw the man she had loved for all these years, the man who had waited patiently with her through 7 childless years. But then his eyes shifted to Falasho, and fear hardened his features again. "I will send what I can to help with food," he said, "but I cannot stay. Not with them." With those words, he walked out of their lives. Bucola collapsed beside her sleeping daughter, her body shaking with silent sobs. Through her tears, she looked at the innocent face of her child, now Falasho again, and made a promise. "I will not leave you," she whispered fiercely. "Either of you. Your father may be gone, but you have me. Always." She gathered the 2 stones and placed them in a small pouch, which she hung around her neck. As long as she lived, she would protect her daughters, the quiet one who smiled in sunlight and the fierce one who cried at the moon. Outside, the village began to stir. Life would continue, but nothing would ever be the same. Bucola wiped her tears and stood up. She had 2 daughters to raise now, and she would need all her strength to do it alone. Years passed like shadows across the village, and Falasho grew into a quiet, thoughtful girl of 8 summers. By day, she helped her mother with chores, her movements careful and precise. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and her large, gentle eyes seemed to take in everything around her. Bucola had done everything possible to keep her daughter's secret. They lived on the edge of the village, in the same small hut where Falasho had been born. Each evening, as the sun began to set, they would retreat inside, closing the door tightly against curious eyes. And each night, as darkness claimed the sky, Falasho would transform into Funcho, wild, bold, and full of strange knowledge. Where Falasho was quiet, Funsho sang loudly. Where Falasho moved with caution, Funsho danced without fear. They were as different as day and night, these twin spirits sharing one body. Mother, Funsho said one night, her voice stronger than a child should be, why must I only live in darkness? Bucola looked up from her weaving. Because that is how you were born, my night daughter. The moon claimed you, while the sun took your sister. Funsho frowned, her features, sharper than Falasho's, creasing with discontent. But I want to see the village in daylight. I want to play with the other children. You know that cannot be, Bucola replied gently. The others would not understand. They would fear what they cannot explain. Like father did, Funsho asked, her eyes flashing with an emotion too adult for her young face. Bucola's hands stilled. Though she had never told either daughter about their father's departure, somehow Funsho knew. She always seemed to know things she shouldn't. Yes, Bucola answered honestly. Like your father, Funsho went to the small window and looked out at the moon. One day, they will see me, she whispered, and they will not be afraid. In the morning, Falasho remembered nothing of her night sister's words or actions. She woke as herself, readying for another day of quiet existence. Mother, may I go to the village school today? She asked, her voice barely audible over the morning cooking fire. Bucola hesitated. She had taught Falasho at home, fearing that too much time among other children might expose their secret. But her daughter was growing, and perhaps it was time to allow her more freedom. Yes, she decided finally. But remember, come home before sunset. Falasho finished for her. I know, mother. The village school consisted of a large shade tree where children gathered to learn from old teacher Kalad. He welcomed Falasho with a kind smile, though the other children stared and whispered behind their hands. The strange one, they called her, though none knew exactly why she felt different to them. The ghost girl who disappears at sunset. Among these children was Umojo, a girl with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Her mother, Adila, had once borrowed money from Bucola for medicine when Umojo was sick. When the time came to repay the debt, Adila had grown angry and insulting rather than admitting she had spent the money on new clothes. Since that day, bad blood had flowed between the two families. And now, seeing Falasho sitting alone under the learning tree, Umojo found a perfect target for her mother's resentment. Look at her, Umojo whispered to her friends. She thinks she's better than us because her mother keeps her locked away like a precious treasure. Maybe she's sick, one boy suggested, or cursed, another added with a nervous giggle. Let's find out, Umojo declared, strutting toward Falasho with her hands on her hips. Falasho looked up from her slate, her eyes widening as Umojo and her friends surrounded her. So the ghost girl decides to join the living, Umojo sneered. What makes you so special that you can't play with normal children? I'm not special, Falasho whispered, looking down. I just have to be home before dark. Why? Will you turn into a bat and fly away? Umojo laughed, and the others joined in. Falasho's cheeks burned with shame, but she said nothing. Inside, she felt a strange stirring, like something was trying to wake up, something that should be sleeping during daylight hours. Don't. Not now, she thought desperately, though she didn't fully understand what she was fighting against. Old teacher Kalad approached, his walking stick tapping against the hard earth. Enough, children. Return to your lessons. Umojo backed away, but not before whispering, This isn't over, ghost girl. As the weeks passed, Falasho continued attending school, always careful to leave early enough to be safely home before sunset. She learned quickly, but made no friends. The other children, following Umojo's leads, kept their distance. Every day, Umojo found new ways to torment her, knocking over her water cup, stealing bits of her lunch, or simply standing too close, hissing insults that only Falasho could hear. Why do you let her treat you this way? Bucola asked one evening as she helped Falasho wash off the mud Omojo had accidentally splashed on her dress. Falasho's eyes, full of a sadness no child should know, met her mother's. Because fighting makes it worse, she said simply. And because sometimes, when she makes me angry, I feel her trying to come out. Bucola understood immediately. Funcho, her night daughter with her fierce spirit, was growing stronger. What would happen if she somehow broke through during daylight? The thought terrified her. You are wise beyond your years, my son-daughter, Bucola said, kissing Falasho's forehead. Later that night, when Funcho emerged, her eyes burned with an anger that made Bucola step back. She hurts my sister, Funcho said, pacing the small hut like a caged leopard. This girl Omojo, she makes Falasho cry when no one is looking. How do you know this? Bucola asked, though she already suspected the answer. I see through her eyes sometimes, Funcho admitted. When her feelings are very strong, I can. Wake up a little. She stopped pacing and faced her mother. I want to protect her. You cannot reveal yourself, Bucola warned. The consequences would be too great. Funcho's young face hardened with determination. There are other ways to protect those we love, she said. Ways that don't require daylight. A shiver ran down Bucola's spine at these words. Her night daughter was planning something, and for the first time, she realized that the power of the twin spirits might be greater than even Mama Ijapa had foreseen. That night, as Bucola slept, Funcho sat by the window, her fingers curled around the moon-bright stone, whispering promises to the darkness, promises of protection, of justice, and perhaps of vengeance. Morning dawned bright and clear, promising a beautiful day. Bucola woke early, grinding millet for the morning porridge, while Falasho, now fully herself again, swept the packed earth floor of their small home. Mother, Falasho said quietly, her broom pausing mid-stroke, today is the day we must pay the school fees. Bucola nodded, her heart heavy. The village school was mostly free, a community service provided by old teacher Kalad. But twice a year, each family contributed what they could to help maintain the learning materials and provide the old man with a small income. I have been saving, Bucola said, reaching for a small clay pot hidden behind a stack of cooking pots. From it, she withdrew a small bundle wrapped in cloth. 6 calories. It's not much, but teacher Kalad will understand. Falasho's eyes widened. She knew how hard her mother worked, weaving baskets to sell at the market, helping with harvests in exchange for a portion of crops, sometimes going without food so that Falasho could eat. These 6 coins represented weeks of careful saving. Thank you, Mother, she whispered, accepting the precious bundle. Bucola tied the money securely in a small pouch and hung it around Falasho's neck, tucking it beneath her dress for safety. Go straight to school and give this to Teacher Kalad, she instructed. Then come straight home. Yes, Mother, Falasho promised, touching the hidden pouch. The morning sun warmed her shoulders as she followed the path toward the village center. Most children walked to school in groups, their laughter floating on the breeze. But Falasho always walked alone. She had learned it was safer that way. But on this day, safety would elude her. As she rounded a bend in the path where tall grass grew on either side, a familiar voice called out, well, if it isn't the ghost girl. Omojo stepped onto the path, blocking Falasho's way. 2 of her friends emerged from the grass, giggling. Falasho stopped, her heart sinking. Please, I need to get to school. School? Omojo stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. What's that around your neck? A charm to keep away spirits. Instinctively, Falasho's hand went to her chest, feeling the outline of the money pouch beneath her dress. It was a mistake. Omojo's eyes lit up with interest. She's hiding something. It's nothing, Falasho said, trying to step around the taller girl. Omojo grabbed her arm, her fingers digging into Falasho's skin. Show me. Please, Follishow begged, tears beginning to form in her eyes. It's just my school fees. The school fees. Omojo's cruel smile widened. Let me see. Before Follishow could stop her, Omojo reached out and yanked the cord from around her neck, breaking it. The small pouch fell into her hand. 6 cowries. Omojo counted, emptying the pouch into her palm. Your mother must have worked hard for these. Please give them back. Follishow pleaded, reaching for the coins. My mother. Your mother owes my mother much more than this. Omojo snapped, suddenly angry. She thinks she's better than us, living alone, keeping you hidden away like some precious secret. That's not true. Follishow whispered. Isn't it? Omojo closed her fist around the coins. Tell your mother this is payment for the disrespect she showed my family. If she wants more money for your school, she can beg for it in the marketplace. With that, Omojo pushed past Follishow, bumping her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. Her friends followed, laughing as though they had witnessed something wonderfully entertaining rather than a cruel theft. Follishow stood on the path, tears streaming down her face. Inside her, she felt a stirring, the familiar pressure of Funsho trying to wake before her time. The feeling was like a wave rising within her, threatening to break through the surface. Soon, she thought desperately. Not now. Not here. Tremendous effort. She pushed her sister's spirit back into its slumber. But she could feel Funsho's rage like a burning coal in her chest. Humiliated and heartbroken, Follishow turned and ran back home, her vision blurred by tears. Bucola was working outside their hut, stretching reeds for new baskets, when Follishow came running down the path. What happened? She asked, dropping her work and rushing to her daughter. Between sobs, Follishow explained about Omojo and the stolen money. As she spoke, Bucola's expression shifted from concern to anger. Wait here, she said firmly. Bucola marched to Adela's compound on the other side of the village, determination in every step. She found Omojo's mother sitting in her courtyard, grinding peppers. Your daughter stole my child's school fees, Bucola said without preamble. Adela looked up, her face hardening. My daughter would never steal. Perhaps your strange child dropped the money and now blames others for her carelessness. Omojo took it from around her neck. Bucola insisted. 6 cowries that I worked weeks to save. 6 cowries. Adela laughed dismissively. And you come accusing my family over such a trifle? You still owe me for the insult you gave me in the marketplace last harvest season. I asked for the money you borrowed, money for medicine when Omojo was sick, Bucola reminded her. That was no insult. You shamed me before the entire market. Adela stood, her hands on her hips. And now you come to my home with more accusations? Other neighbors had begun to gather, attracted by the raised voices. Leave my compound, Adela demanded, and teach your daughter to be more careful with her possessions. Bucola looked around at the curious faces watching them. She knew she would find no support here, not against Adela, whose family had lived in the village for generations. With a heavy heart, she turned and walked away, the neighbors' whispers following her like shadows. When she returned home, Follishow was sitting quietly by the cooking fire, her eyes red from crying. I'm sorry, Mother, she said softly. It is not your fault, Bucola assured her, though her voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. We will find another way. But as the day progressed, Bucola's options dwindled. There was no extra work to be found, no one willing to advance her money. By evening, she had exhausted every possibility. With growing desperation, she did something she had promised herself she would never do. She walked to her former husband's new home on the other side of the village. Eiji had married again, a woman with no children of her own who welcomed him into her large family compound. He worked as a carpenter now, and people said he was doing well. Bucola stood outside the compound, gathering her courage before calling his name. When he emerged, His face showed surprise, followed quickly by weariness. Bucola, he said stiffly. What brings you here? I need help, she admitted, her pride crumbling under the weight of her daughter's need. Falashow's school fees were stolen. 6 cowries. I have nowhere else to turn. Deji shifted uncomfortably, glancing back at the compound where his new life continued without the complications of his past. I cannot help you, he said finally. My new family has its own needs. She is your daughter, Bucola reminded him, her voice breaking. A shadow crossed his face. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. I said I cannot help. His voice hardened. Do not come here again, Bucola. That part of my life is over. The door closed with a finality that left Bucola standing alone in the gathering darkness, empty-handed and heartsick. Night had fallen completely by the time she returned home. Inside their hut, the transformation had already begun. Falashow's gentle features were sharpening, becoming Funcho's more determined face. Bucola sat heavily on her sleeping mat, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had failed both her daughters. Mother, Funcho's voice, stronger and more confident than Falashow's, broke the silence. Why are you crying? Bucola looked up to see her night daughter watching her intently, the moon-bright stone clutched in her small hand. Unlike Falashow, who shied away from confrontation, Funcho faced problems head-on. Today was difficult, Bucola said simply, too exhausted to explain. I know it happened, Funcho said, surprising her mother. I saw it through Falashow's eyes. I felt her pain. You were awake during the day? Bucola asked, alarmed. Funcho shook her head. Not awake. But when her feelings are very strong, I can see glimpses, like watching through water. She approached her mother and placed something in her lap. Take this and dry your tears. Bucola looked down and gasped. There, in her lap, lay 6 cowrie shells, identical to the ones Omojo had stolen. Ow, she whispered, picking up one of the coins. It felt real solid. The stones, Funcho explained, holding up the moon-bright stone that was now glowing softly in the darkness. The strange woman who gave them to you said they would be needed. This is why. Bucola stared at her night daughter, suddenly understanding. You can create things with the stones? Not create. Funcho corrected. Return what was taken unfairly. Balance what was unbalanced. Her young face looked suddenly older, wiser. These coins are the same ones that Omojo stole. I called them back to us. A mixture of awe and fear washed over Bucola. The power her night daughter possessed was greater than she had imagined, and potentially more dangerous. What else can you do with the stones? She asked cautiously. Funcho's eyes gleamed in the dim light of their hut. I can grant wishes, Mother. The wishes of those I love. She touched Bucola's hand gently. What do you wish for most? Bucola looked into her daughter's eyes, seeing both the child she was and the powerful being she might become. In that moment, her heart spoke before her mind could caution it. I wish for Falashow to be happy, she said, to be free from those who hurt her, to walk without fear. Funcho nodded solemnly, closing her fingers around the glowing stone. Then that is what shall be. Outside, the moon sailed between clouds, casting shifting shadows across the village. Something had changed this night. A balance tilted, a power awakened. And though Bucola didn't yet understand the full implications of her wish, she felt both hope and trepidation as she watched her night daughter smile with quiet certainty. The next morning, Falashow woke with no memory of her night sister's promise. She only knew that her mother seemed strangely calm as she placed the 6 cowrie shells in her hands. How? Falashow asked, confused. Almojo took these. Let's just say they found their way back to us, Bucola replied with a small smile. Now hurry, or you'll be late for school. This time, Bucola accompanied her daughter partway down the path, watching until Falashow reached the edge of the village before turning back to her work. Neither of them noticed the small, dark shadow that seemed to follow Falasho, clinging to her footsteps like a loyal friend. Falasho approached the school with cautious steps, her eyes scanning for Omojo and her friends. She clutched her small pouch of coins tightly, determined not to lose them again. She had almost reached the learning tree when she heard that familiar mocking voice. "Look who's back," Omojo called, stepping out from behind a storage hut. "Did your strange mother find more coins for you, ghost girl?" Falasho said nothing, trying to walk past, but Omojo blocked her path. "I asked you a question," Omojo sneered, reaching for Falasho's arm. What happened next occurred so quickly that the few children watching would later give conflicting accounts. As Omojo's fingers stretched toward Falasho's arm, her hand suddenly seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Her fingers elongated, darkened, and before anyone could blink, her hand was no longer a hand at all. Omojo's scream pierced the quiet morning. Where her hand had been, there now sprouted twisted branches, complete with small buds and fresh leaves. The transformation stopped at her wrist, leaving her with a human arm that ended in a living piece of tree. "What have you done to me?" Omojo shrieked, staring in horror at her transformed hand. Falasho stepped back, equally shocked. I didn't do anything." But inside, deep in a place that only existed in the space between day and night, Funcho smiled. The shadow that had followed Falasho all morning merged back into her body, its purpose fulfilled. Children scattered in all directions, some running to get adults, others simply fleeing in terror. Old teacher Kalad emerged from under the learning tree, his face paling at the sight of Omojo's transformed hand. "Witchcraft," someone whispered, and the word spread like fire through dry grass. Trembling with fear and confusion, Falasho turned and ran home, the forgotten coin still clutched in her hand. Behind her, Omojo's wails echoed through the village. "Mother!" Falasho burst into their hut, breathless and terrified. "Something terrible has happened." Bucola looked up from her weaving, immediately alert. "What is it?" Between gasping breaths, Falasho explained what had happened to Omojo, how her hand had transformed into branches before everyone's eyes. As she spoke, a growing suspicion formed in Bucola's mind, remembering her wish from the night before and Funcho's solemn promise. Before she could question her daughter further, angry voices approached their hut. Bucola pushed Falasho behind her just as Adela burst through the doorway, dragging a sobbing Omojo by her unaffected arm. "Look what your demon child has done," Adela shouted, thrusting Omojo forward. Bucola stared at the girl's transformed hand, branches where fingers should be, leaves unfurling in the sunlight that streamed through the doorway. It was beautiful in its way, but terrifying in its unnaturalness. "My daughter did not do this," Bucola said firmly, though doubt crept into her heart. "Who else could it be?" Adila demanded, her voice breaking. "Everyone knows your child is not natural. The girl who disappears at sunset, who never plays with others." She pointed an accusing finger at Falasho, who cowered behind her mother. "She has cursed my daughter." Several villagers had gathered outside, their faces tense with fear and suspicion. Bucola realized with growing dread that this could quickly become dangerous for both her daughters. "I will help," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "But not like this. Not with accusations." "Then how?" Adila asked, tears now streaming down her face as she held her daughter close. Despite their past conflicts, Bucola's heart softened at the sight of a mother's fear for her child. "And there is a man in the next village," Bucola said, "a healer more powerful than our local spiritualist. Let us take Omojo to him." Adila hesitated, torn between her hatred for Bucola and her desperate need to help her daughter. "Very well," she said finally. "But if he cannot help, the village council will hear of this witchcraft." The journey to the neighboring village took most of the day. Falasho stayed home, too afraid to face the accusing stares of the other villagers. Bukola walked beside Adila and Omojo, maintaining a respectful distance that reflected the tension between them. Omojo had stopped crying, but her eyes were wide with shock, and she cradled her transformed hand against her chest as if it might shatter if touched. Does it hurt? Bukola asked gently as they walked. Omojo shook her head. It feels strange, like my hand is still there, but I can feel the sun on the leaves and the sap moving inside. A small sob escaped her. Will I be like this forever? We will find help, Bukola promised, though she was less certain than she sounded. The healer lived in a compound at the edge of the neighboring village. Smoke curled from the roof of his medicine hut, and strange symbols adorned the walls. He was younger than Bukola had expected, but his eyes held ancient wisdom. He listened to their story without interruption, then examined Omojo's transformed hand with professional detachment. This is powerful magic, he said finally. Not something I have seen before. Can you fix it? Adila demanded. The healer shook his head slowly. This is not something I can undo. The magic that created this transformation is too deeply rooted. Then who can help her? Adila cried, desperation breaking through her usual hardness. The healer's gaze settled on Bukola. The one who caused this is the only one who can undo it. But my daughter did nothing, Bukola protested. Perhaps not consciously, the healer replied. But this magic came from your household, from a spirit closely bound to your bloodline. He looked back at Omojo's tree hand. This is protective magic, triggered by threat. What did you do to provoke such a response? He asked the girl directly. Omojo looked down, unable to meet his eyes. I. I took her school money yesterday, and I was going to take it again today. Adila's face flushed with embarrassment. You said you found that money on the path. I lied, Omojo whispered. I've been. I've been mean to her for a long time. Bukola watched the girl's confession with mixed emotions. Vindication that the truth was finally being acknowledged, but also sadness at the pain etched on both Omojo's and Adila's faces. The healer nodded as if confirming something he already knew. The path forward is clear then. The one who was wronged must forgive the one who did wrong. Truly forgive, not just in words. And the magic will recognize this truth and release its hold. You mean Falasho must forgive Omojo? Bukola asked. The spirit that protected her must be satisfied that justice has been served, the healer clarified. Until then, this transformation will remain. They returned to their village as the sun began to set, each woman lost in her own thoughts. Bukola knew now what had happened. Funsho had used the power of the stones to grant her wish, protecting her day sister from further bullying in the most effective way possible. As they approached the village, Adila finally broke the silence. Will your daughter help mine? Bukola chose her words carefully. Falasho has a kind heart, but true forgiveness requires true remorse. Adila nodded slowly, understanding the implication. Years of enmity would not be erased in a single day. They would need to make amends, real, meaningful amends, before healing could begin. As they parted ways at the village center, Bukola turned to Omojo. Come to our hut tomorrow morning, she said gently. We will talk then. Omojo nodded, her eyes still fixed on her transformed hand, where small buds had begun to unfurl into delicate white flowers. Bukola hurried home as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the hills. She needed to speak with Funsho to understand exactly what her night daughter had done and whether it could truly be undone. As she approached their small hut, she steeled herself for the difficult conversation ahead. Inside, the transformation would already be beginning. Falasho giving way to Funsho as darkness claimed the land. The twin spirits shared one body, but held separate hearts. And now, the fate of another child rested in their hands. One flesh, one wood, both bearing the weight of actions and consequences neither fully understood. Dawn broke over the village, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Bucola had barely slept. Her night had been filled with difficult conversations with Funsho, who showed little remorse for transforming Omojo's hand. She deserved it, Funsho had said, her young face set in stubborn lines. She hurt Falasho. She stole from us, but to change her body, Bucola had argued, to make her into something not fully human, that is too harsh a punishment for a child's cruelty. Funsho had simply shrugged. You wish for Falasho to be free from those who hurt her. I granted your wish. Now, as morning light filled their small hut, Bucola watched Falasho wake, stretching and blinking away sleep. The transformation was complete. Gone was the fierce determination in her eyes, replaced by Falasho's gentle uncertainty. Mother? Falasho asked, noticing Bucola's tired face. Did something happen? How to explain to her day daughter what her night sister had done? Bucola sighed and sat beside Falasho on her sleeping mat. Omojo will be coming to visit us this morning, she said carefully. Something has happened to her, something connected to us. Confusion clouded Falasho's eyes. Connected to us? How? Before Bucola could find the right words, a soft knock came at their door. Taking a deep breath, she rose to answer it. Outside stood Omojo and her mother. Adila's face was drawn with worry, while Omojo looked small and afraid, nothing like the proud bully she had been just days ago. Her transformed hand was wrapped in cloth, hiding it from curious eyes. Come in, Bucola said, stepping aside. Falasho gasped when she saw Omojo, instinctively backing away, not from fear of the other girl, but from the memory of countless humiliations and cruelties. It's all right, Bucola assured her daughter. They are here for help, not to cause trouble. Adila guided Omojo forward then, in a gesture that clearly cost her considerable pride, she knelt before Bucola. We have wronged you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For years, I have spread unkind words about you and your daughter. I let my pride turn a small dispute into a bitter feud, and I taught my daughter to hate yours. She looked up, tears in her eyes. I am sorry, truly sorry. Bucola was stunned. Never had she expected such humility from the proud Adila. Before she could respond, Adila turned to Omojo. Show them, she instructed softly. With trembling fingers, Omojo unwrapped the cloth from her hand. Overnight, the transformation had progressed. What had been merely branches now bloomed with tiny white flowers and tender green leaves. It was beautiful in its own strange way, but clearly not human. Falasho stared, wide-eyed. What happened to you? It happened yesterday, Omojo explained, her voice barely above a whisper. When I tried to take your money again, my hand changed. She looked down at the flowering branches. The healer says only you can help me. Me? Falasho looked to her mother in confusion. But I don't know how to fix this. Bucola sat between the two girls, choosing her words with care. The healer believes this happened because of a protective spirit connected to our family, a spirit that was trying to defend you from further harm. Understanding dawned in Falasho's eyes. Though she had no conscious memory of her night sister's actions, some part of her sensed the truth. And I need to forgive Omojo to make the spirit release her? She asked quietly. Bucola nodded. True forgiveness from your heart, not just words. Falasho looked at Omojo, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Instead of the intimidating bully, she saw a frightened girl not so different from herself. Someone who had made poor choices, yes, but also someone capable of change. Why did you hate me so much? Falasho asked, her gentle voice free of accusation. What did I ever do to make you want to hurt me? Omojo's lower lip trembled. My mother was angry with your mother, and I thought I should be angry too. And then, you were so different. So quiet. You never fought back. She looked down at her transformed hand. I think I was jealous. Jealous? Of me? Falasho couldn't hide her surprise. Your mother loves you so much, Omojo said softly. She protects you, walks with you to school, works so hard to provide for you. My mother. She glanced at Adela, who looked away in shame. My mother was often too busy with her own concerns to notice mine. Adela wiped a tear from her cheek. I have not been the mother I should have been, she admitted. My pride has cost us both dearly. A heavy silence fell over the hut. Years of resentment, misunderstanding, and pain hung in the air between them. Bucola wondered if wounds so deep could truly be healed in a single moment. Falasho rose and walked to the small shelf where she kept her treasures. A pretty stone, a feather, a dried flower. From behind these, she retrieved the earth-dark stone that was her day talisman. Something inside her, some instinct she couldn't name, told her she would need it. She returned to Omojo and sat cross-legged before her. I've been afraid of you for so long, she said honestly. Every day, I worried about what new way you'd find to hurt me. It made school a place of fear instead of learning. Omojo hung her head, tears dripping onto her flowered hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Falasho took a deep breath. I believe you, and I want to help you. She held out her hand. May I? Hesitantly, Omojo extended her transformed hand. Falasho gently took it in hers, marveling at how warm the wood felt, how alive. I forgive you, Omojo, she said, closing her eyes. Not just for yesterday or for taking my school money, but for all of it. All the mean words, all the pushing, all the times you made me feel small. She squeezed the wooden fingers gently. I forgive you. As she spoke, the earth-dark stone in her other hand began to warm. A soft glow, barely visible in the morning light, pulsed between her fingers. If you truly mean it, Bucola said softly, then tell Omojo what you would wish for her. Falasho opened her eyes and looked directly at Omojo. I wish for your hand to be healed, and I wish for us to find a new way forward, not as enemies, but maybe, someday, as friends. The stone's warmth intensified, spreading up Falasho's arm and flowing into Omojo's transformed hand. The wood began to soften, the flowers to fade. Slowly, the branches receded, replaced by human flesh and bone. Omojo gasped, flexing fingers that had been twigs only moments before. It's changing back, she exclaimed. Then, overwhelmed by emotion, she threw her arms around Falasho in a tight embrace. Thank you, she sobbed. Thank you. Falasho, startled by the sudden show of affection, awkwardly patted Omojo's back. Over the other girl's shoulder, she met her mother's eyes. Bucola smiled, her heart full of pride for her day daughter's compassion. Adela approached Bucola, her hands clasped before her. I don't understand what happened here, she said quietly. But I know my daughter has been given a second chance she did not deserve. We both have. She reached for Bucola's hand. Let us end this feud between our families. Please, Bucola nodded, accepting the offered hand. For our daughter's sake. As the morning progressed, an unusual scene unfolded in Bucola's small compound. Two women who had been bitter enemies sat sharing palm wine in conversation. Two girls who had been bully and victim sat beneath a tree, tentatively discovering common ground. Does your hand feel normal now? Falasho asked, eyeing Omojo's restored hand curiously. Omojo flexed her fingers. Almost. It feels tingly. And look, she held out her palm, where a small, delicate leaf pattern remained etched into her skin, like a natural tattoo. The healer said some marks might remain as a reminder. A reminder? Falasho echoed. To be kinder, Omojo said simply. To think before I act. She looked at Falasho with new respect. You could have left me that way. Why didn't you? Falasho considered the question. Because it wouldn't have been right. People make mistakes. People can change. She glanced at the two mothers, now talking without hostility for the first time in years. See? They're changing too. As afternoon approached, Adila and Omojo prepared to leave. But before they did, Adila approached Falasho with something clutched in her hand. These belong to you, she said, opening her palm to reveal 6 cowrie shells. Your school fees. Omojo should never have taken them. Falasho accepted the money with a small smile. Thank you. And, Adila continued, I would like to offer something else. She looked at Bucola. Your daughter is welcome to walk with El Mojo to school each day. For safety, and, she hesitated, for companionship. The offer was more significant than it might seem to an outsider. It was an acknowledgement of equality, an extension of protection, a public alignment of the two families. That would be nice, Falasho said before her mother could answer. As Adila and Omojo departed, promising to return the next day to walk to school together, Bucola put her arm around Falasho's shoulders. I'm proud of you, she said. What you did today took great courage and an even greater heart. Falasho leaned against her mother. It felt right, like something inside me knew what needed to be done. She looked up at Bucola. Mother did. She said, do this to Omojo? My night sister. Bucola hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Luncho used her powers to protect you, though perhaps more strongly than was needed. Can I talk to her somehow? Falasho asked. I've always wondered what she's like. She knows you, Bucola explained. She sees through your eyes sometimes, feels what you feel, but you cannot speak directly to each other. You exist in different realms, day and night, sun and moon. Falasho nodded thoughtfully. Will you tell her something from me tonight? Of course. Tell her thank you for trying to protect me, but also tell her that sometimes people deserve a second chance. That forgiveness can be more powerful than punishment. Bucola smiled, touched by her daughter's wisdom. I will tell her. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Bucola prepared their evening meal. She found herself looking forward to night with less anxiety than usual. Today had brought unexpected healing, not just for Omojo's transformed hand, but for old wounds that had festered between two families for too long. And tonight, she would have much to tell Funcho about her day sister's capacity for compassion, a lesson the night daughter, with all her power and fierceness, might do well to learn. Years passed in the village, flowing like the river that bordered their lands, sometimes swift and tumultuous, sometimes gentle and nurturing. The story of Omojo's transformation became a whispered legend among the children, growing more fantastical with each telling until few remembered the true events. What everyone did know, however, was that two families once divided by bitterness had become inseparable allies. Adila and Bucola could often be seen working side by side in the market, their combined skills making both households prosperous. And where Bucola and Falasho had once lived in isolation, they now stood at the heart of village life, respected and valued by all. Falasho had grown into a young woman of 16, her quiet nature balanced by a newly discovered confidence. She still preferred books to crowds and thoughtful conversation to idle chatter, but she no longer shrank from others' company. And beside her always walked Omojo, who had transformed in her own way from a cruel bully into a fierce protector of those weaker than herself. The small leaf pattern on Omojo's palm had never faded, a permanent reminder of the lesson she had learned and the second chance she had been given. But while Falasho's days were filled with friendship and learning, her nights still belonged to her sister. Each sunset brought the familiar transformation, as Funcho emerged to claim the dark hours. Unlike her day sister, Funcho had struggled with the lesson of forgiveness. The night after Omojo's hand was restored, she had been furious. You undid my protection, she had accused her mother. Now Falasho is vulnerable again. No, Bucola had explained patiently. Falasho protected herself in a different way. through compassion rather than fear. She turned an enemy into a friend. Over time, Funcho had come to understand, though her fierce nature never fully embraced the gentle approach of her day sister. But she, too, had grown and changed. Where once she had used her powers recklessly, she now wielded them with greater wisdom. The stones, one dark as earth, one bright as moon, remained the source of Funcho's magic. Through them, she granted wishes to those her family loved, but always with careful consideration of the consequences. A farmer's failing crops would flourish overnight. A sick child would wake suddenly healed. A lost item would reappear in the most unlikely place. Small miracles that most attributed to good fortune, but which Bucola knew were her night daughter's gifts to the village that had finally accepted them. As Bucola's hair began to show strands of silver, and lines appeared at the corners of her eyes, she sometimes worried what would become of her daughters when she was gone. Who would keep their secret? Who would help them navigate their unusual existence? On one such night of worry, as Funcho sat weaving complex patterns of light between her fingers with the help of the moon-bright stone, Bucola voiced her fears. "What will happen to you both when I am no longer here to guide you?" Funcho looked up, her eyes reflecting the dancing lights she had created. "You have guided us well, Mother, but you have also taught us to guide ourselves." She closed her hand, extinguishing the light show. "Besides, I have seen our path." "Seen it?" Bucola asked. "How?" "In dreams," Funcho explained. "Dreams that both Falasho and I share, though she remembers them only as feelings when she wakes." She moved to sit beside her mother, taking her aging hands in her young ones. "We will not always be divided as we are now. The time will come when day and night meet, another eclipse like the one that gave us birth, and we will make a choice." "What choice?" Bucola asked, her heart tightening with a mother's instinctive fear. "Whether to continue as we are, two spirits sharing one body, or to separate fully into two beings." Funcho smiled at her mother's surprised expression. "Did you think such a thing impossible? The strange woman who gave you the stones knew our fate from the beginning." Bucola remembered the woman's words from so long ago. One body, two spirits, born under the eclipse, touched by both earth and moon. But how would such a separation happen?" she asked. Funcho shook her head. "That knowledge hasn't been revealed to me. Only that the choice will come, and that we must be ready for it." The night of the eclipse arrived the following year. It had been 17 years since Falasho and Funcho had been born, 17 years of sharing one body between two distinct spirits. Bucola had prepared carefully for this night, guided by both her daughter's shared dreams and the wisdom of Mama Ijapa, who, though now ancient, had summoned enough strength to advise them one last time. In the center of their compound, Bucola had drawn a circle divided by a wavy line, one half in red ochre, representing the day, the other in white chalk, representing the night. At the center, she placed the two stones that had been their companions since birth. As the moon began to slide into the earth's shadow, Falasho stood in the circle, her body trembling with more than just the cool night air. "Are you afraid?" Bucola asked, standing just outside the circle. "Yes," Falasho admitted, "but also ready." She had lived 17 years knowing she was only half of who she was meant to be, always sleeping through the night hours when her sister lived. What if the separation fails? What if one of us disappears? "Trust in the power that brought you both into this world," Bucola said, though her own heart raced with fear. "Trust in each other." The moon darkened further, and as it did, something extraordinary happened. The transformation that usually took hours compressed into minutes. Falasho's features shifted and changed until Funcho stood in her place, but not completely. It was as if the two sisters were superimposed, both present in one body that couldn't quite decide which form to take. "Mother," they spoke in unison, their voices overlapping in eerie harmony. "It's beginning." The stones at the center of the circle began to glow, the earth dark one pulsing with a deep amber light, the moon bright one shimmering with silver. The two lights spiraled upward, encircling the shared body of the sisters. Remember, Bucola called out as the light grew almost too bright to bear. Whatever happens, you are both my daughters, both beloved, both needed in this world. The combined form of Falasho and Funsho raised their hands, one reaching toward the sun's direction, though it was long set, the other toward the eclipsed moon. As they did, their body began to stretch and separate, like clay being pulled into two distinct shapes. Light flashed, momentarily blinding Bucola. When her vision cleared, she gasped in wonder and disbelief. Where one daughter had stood, now there were two. Valasho, on the day side of the circle, her gentle face bewildered but joyful. Funcho, on the night side, her more angular features showing the same amazement. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, day sister and night sister, seeing each other fully for the first time in their lives. You're real, Falasho whispered, reaching out a tentative hand. As are you, Funsho replied, extending her own. As their fingers touched, another flash of light pulsed between them. The stones rose from the ground, spiraling once more before settling. The earth dark stone around Falasho's neck, the moon bright stone around Funsho's. Bucola watched in awe as her daughters, now both fully physically present in the world, embraced. Tears streamed down her face. All these years, she had raised what she thought was one child with two spirits. Now she understood that she had always had two daughters, their separate existence merely waiting for the right moment to manifest. In the days and years that followed, the village marveled at the miracle of the twin sisters who had once been believed to be a single child. Some remembered the strange woman's words at the naming ceremony so long ago, finally understanding that she had seen the truth from the beginning. Falasho continued as she had been, gentle, thoughtful, a healer who used the earth-dark stone to nurture and mend. She eventually married a young man from a neighboring village, a scholar who valued her quiet wisdom and kind heart. Funcio, finally free to experience the day world, proved to be as brilliant in sunlight as she was under the moon. She never married, choosing instead to travel far beyond their village, using the moon-bright stone to protect travelers and guide lost souls. The leaf pattern that had marked Omojo's palm appeared on Funcio's as well, a shared symbol of the lesson both had learned about power and its proper use. And Bucola, blessed with two daughters where once she had thought herself barren, lived to see grandchildren from Falasho and to receive rare, precious visits from Funcho, who always returned with wondrous tales and exotic gifts. On clear nights, when the moon shone full and bright over the village, Bucola would sometimes stand outside her hut and look up at the stars. She would remember the night of the eclipse that had brought her such an unusual blessing, and she would whisper a thank you to the strange woman who had given her the two stones. For in the end, it was not the stones themselves that had held the true magic. It was the love between a mother and her daughters, one born of the sun, one born of the moon, both eternally connected by the bonds that transcend even the boundaries between day and night. And in villages far and wide, people told the story of the twin spirits, a tale of forgiveness, courage, and the magic that happens when we accept both the light and shadow within ourselves and others. A reminder that sometimes what seems like a curse may in fact be the greatest blessing, its true nature revealed only when we have the wisdom and patience to wait for the proper alignment of sun, moon, and heart.